Welcome to Enlightened Abroad, the podcast with Derek Stroud.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. You know, there's things all around the world. I just did a full moon sadhana kundalini morning thing, and I'm like totally blissed out on natural stuff. It's crazy. It was a 2.5 hour chanting yoga meditation exercise. Great way to wake up. I'm kind of just reeling about, and my brain and mouth are seeming not to really connect as they do, but maybe that's probably a good thing. I want to offer a couple of new things in this intro. So I like to do a little bit more than just introduce the show. So I'm going to do kind of like a weekly comment section, and then I'm going to also do things that I found useful during the week that I personally recommend. And finally, I'm going to ask for a couple of things from you, my listeners who are hanging in. And I can't believe it's episode 8. You know, it's I've learned so much by doing this, but I'll tell you, one of the best things is that I've gotten so much back that I didn't expect. And in just terms of connections with people and just notes from people who I haven't heard of or didn't even know, it's meant so much to me, and it's really propelled me to continue. So thank you for that. So Notre Dame. Notre Dame affected so many people, and I found it so fascinating because, to be honest, for me, it didn't have that impact. It's just a building. And I thought, you know, it's sad. I'm glad, hopefully no one was hurt. I think maybe someone was hurt, but no one died. And I thought, it's a building. It's sad that it's gone, part of it. But I was like awed by this just outpouring of money and love and thing. And I thought, wow. And then I thought, you know, being like super into humanity and trying to continue, I thought, like, what about the outrage on the oceans and the rainforests that are burning? And I thought, there's got to be something here, because that's much more detrimental to our existence than a building, right? So what was it? And I think it was something about impermanence. And you always just thought like the Notre Dame Cathedral would just be there. It was iconic, and to see it just go so fast and fire is so dramatic, and then realize, wow, things are impermanent. Things don't last forever. Maybe I won't last forever. I won't last forever. I'm going to die. Everybody's going to die. And then, you know, you can't really grasp the whole like oceans dying thing, but to see a building burning, it's like so clear. And I think that reflecting on impermanence can really help us come into the present moment, you know? So dharmaseed.org has these great podcasts about this stuff. I'll put some links down. Another great resource is Jack Kornfield's The Wise Heart. It's a book. I found it fantastic, specifically chapter 17 on karma. He talks about planting seeds and laying down intentions for your life, but also for the day. So you could conceivably just go out about your day and say, I'm just going to be joyful today. I'm going to bring joy to everything I do. And you go throughout your day, you just forget about it. And, you know, what happens generally is it just kind of pops into your head when you start to get triggered, or something happens and you get angry in traffic or whatever. You say, oh yeah, it's joy. And maybe you're not able to be joyful in that moment, but you do remember it. And what it does, it gives you a different relationship to your reaction. So you may not be joyful all day. Actually, you may be the opposite, you may be pissed off, but it'll give you that sort of like space to reflect. I found it really useful. And so just jot down in my journal, you know, one intention for the day and see how it goes. Then at night I come back, and if I don't like grab a bottle of wine and get wasted that day, I reflect in my journal and say, hey, how did it go? And sometimes it didn't go well, sometimes it did, but it's a great sort of exercise to do daily. Just what seed are you planting today? What are you bringing to the table? And I think that's it. Those things. Oh, podcasts. Russell Brand has an awesome podcast, Under the Skin. I highly recommend episode 74 with a woman named Wendy, Mandy. And she's this shaman who's been doing this work for 40 some odd years, I think. And she just lays it out there, talks about plant medicine, talks about ceremonies and what sort of aspects about society could possibly change and could possibly support us. It's just mind-blowing, this stuff. I mean, there is a shift happening in this Aquarian age, and it is quite special to see. And everyone plays a part in it. There's a duality happening. Everybody has something to play. But to see these things emerge, it's really, really encouraging. So check out that one. Lastly, there's a great podcast called Plant Proof. If you are into healthy food, this guy, his name is Simon. I'll put his link down as well, his last name there. And Simon is basically just digging way into the science on why plants are better for you. Well, there are 3 ways you can support Enlightened Abroad and support me. I realize that, this cannot continue if I don't have name recognition, or I don't have any huge guest that's very famous, or I don't have tons of followers on social media. I have none of those things. So basically, if you like it, share it with 5 friends, put it in a WhatsApp group. Just go to iTunes, go to the Enlightened Abroad podcast, go on settings, and there's a share button where you can just click the share button, and then it gets the link, and then it goes straight to your group, your email, whatever. You can do a specific episode. So if you like, say, episode 7 with Elizabeth Mayor, and you found it useful, just do that episode, and you click on that episode, and it'll send that episode to all your friends. So they don't have to sift through episodes they may not want to hear. That's one thing you could do. Another thing that could really be supportive, if you don't have iTunes, you're using Android, then just go to Stitcher, go to Spotify, and do the same thing. Another thing is enlightenedabroad.com has a contact form. If you go to enlightenedabroad.com, click on contact, fill out the few fields. It's only your name and all that. Put a comment in, tell me what you liked or didn't like, and then I can go and I can reply to you, but I can also put it in the show. So if you think someone's going to be good for the show, or something you did or didn't like, just go ahead and comment there, and that will help move traffic to enlightenedabroad.com. Finally, Stratcast at Stratcast on Instagram or Twitter, but let's go with Instagram. And I'm using that to host Enlightened Abroad for now. So go to Stratcast on Instagram and like and share and do that. So those 3 things. Instagram, Stratcast, enlightenedabroad.com, contact form, and just go to iTunes and share with friends and get them to subscribe if you can, because that will really help. And not just listen and download, but subscribe. It keeps the thing going. And thank you. Enjoy episode 8. So episode 8, this is Patrick. Please enjoy Patrick. We're going to talk about his 11 years abroad, 37 countries. We go through his Canadian upbringing, his Korea journey, and also how he did the special year work abroad in Australia, and how you can do that too. And finally, some of his thoughts on staying or going, home or not, and being a digital nomad. So please enjoy this episode 8 with Patrick, and thanks for listening. Patrick.
Indeed.
Thank you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah.
This one is I'm excited about because of one reason, and that you're the first guy that I really don't know that well. I mean, we met a couple of times.
Right.
And the other ones I've done have been my friends, and so it's been a little bit awkward because I'm asking them questions that I know the answer to.
Right.
So this is new territory.
Well, I'm honored. Thanks for having me on.
I guess a good place to start would just be your, where you grew up.
So I'm from Montreal, Canada, which is inside the province of Quebec, which is, I guess, unique because it's a majority French, and of all the provinces, it's got a kind of unique linguistic, cultural, political history. So I grew up in an English neighborhood. So the country of Canada is majority English. The province of Quebec is majority French. And then my neighborhood was particularly English.
You classify yourself as bilingual then?
Yes. So my written French is probably not as good as it should be. I haven't had much need to do much writing in a very long time, but I'm functionally bilingual in terms of if I have to work with the public in French, it's not a problem at all.
So growing up with this type of language surrounding you, being bilingual and having that influence, did that spark a love of languages for you, or?
It didn't. I always felt myself coming up short, I guess, because My mother grew up speaking 3 languages. Both my parents grew up speaking 3 languages. So my mother came from Italian immigrants. She was she was conceived in Italy but born in Canada, and she grew up with English, French, and Italian. And my dad grew up in Haiti, got French and Creole, but then he went to high school in Puerto Rico and he learned Spanish and English at the same time. And he ended up being a language teacher and learning several languages after that. And in Quebec, it's just expected that you're bilingual English and French. So I had a lot of friends who were 100% bilingual. Maybe they had a French mother, English father, so they spoke to each parent in that language that was native, or they had, let's say, a French caretaker, lived in an English neighborhood. So I always felt like I wasn't that good at languages, and it only is when I went to Korea that I realized that I wasn't too bad, at least compared to my unilingual peers in terms of being open and...
Oh, yeah? So was Korea your first jump out of Quebec?
For living, yes. So when I was young, I went to the States, the other side of Canada, and Haiti. So I had just a little bit of travel, but it was always based on family members or friends that live there, or, shopping to the U.S. Most of the Canadian cities are very close to the U.S. border, and Montreal is one of them. So
where did you guys go to shop? Did you go to
Vermont?
Oh, yeah?
New York. Yeah. So I did New York City when I was a bit older, but yeah, usually, New York State and Vermont.
Nice. And did you get this travel bug when you went to Haiti?
I think traveling to a country that's very different than your own, especially when you're young, is really positive. For me, I don't remember when I was a baby, but when I was 7, there's 2 things as a kid I remember. One was there was beauty, things were very different, but also, the poverty, in terms of how different living conditions for most people were over there. And I grew up with stories about Europe and distant family members and stuff like this. So I always had a bit of that desire to travel to different places.
So tell me what it was for you that made you take this jump into the expat life.
So I remember when I was young, with a couple of my friends who were travel-minded, we would kind of count how many countries we had been to. And obviously at that point, it was a low number, say 3 or 4. And some of my friends were able to go to Europe and do other trips that I never got to go on. So I still always had it in the back of my mind. But what kicked it off for Korea was 2 things. I had a friend in university who had gone for the World Cup and had lived there. And I think he did a bit of teaching as well. And then an ex-girlfriend who had lived there. So it was on my radar, but I knew much more about the culture and history of China and Japan than I did about Korea. Although I was aware it was a hotspot for teaching English. And my best friend and another friend, they were both a year ahead of me in university, and they decided to go first. So I went to go visit them. I stayed there for 2 months. I met their extended group of friends, and I realized I could do this. This is not only something I want to try in terms of travel, but I want to give teaching English a shot.
This was 2010?
2006 I went to visit.
Oh, 2006.
Yeah.
Oh.
But this isn't when I left. So what happened was my best friend, he wanted to do a second year. And by that time I had my diploma. So I was very excited because, not only do I get to finally have this experience, which I've known a lot of people that have done, but I kind of get to do it with my best friend. So, it won't feel like as much doing it alone. And he was already a little bit set up with people he knew in Korea.
Perfect. So it was right out of university then? Went straight there?
Right out of university. And it was the dying days of the Wild West or Golden Age, or I forget, Jabari had mentioned, whatever term you want to use.
Yeah, so you were at the end of it, right? So
yeah, it was just before the financial collapse of 2008.
Right.
So the demand for Weigukin, ourselves, or native English speakers, it far exceeded the supply. So I got just a taste of that era. But then, social media was new at the time. People knew that teaching in Korea was a thing more and more, and personal references from friends. And then, the world economy took a nosedive. And suddenly after that, there were supply and demand kind of shifted the other way around.
Yes. And I was one of those guys.
Yes.
So I was one of those guys who came in I'll try this out now. But, and I don't want to ask you too much, whatever you want to share. But so it seems like, if I'm getting this right, you were going just for adventure and fun and friends.
At first,
At
yeah.
first.
Like in the beginning, I didn't know that I would make. So I've been an expat now for over 11 years, just over 11 years.
How many countries have you been to?
I had to count a few years ago when I've been going on holiday. So it's 37 countries I've traveled to and 5 countries that I've lived in.
Ooh, very nice.
And it's weird because I don't think that's a high number, maybe because I've been hanging out with travelers who've done like double or triple that for a long time. But, you know, sometimes I forget. I go back home and somebody asks me the same question and I just go, 30, 35 at the time or whatever. They're like, whoa, that's a lot. I'm like, I guess so. But I still have a lot more on the list that I haven't been to that I'd like to visit.
So now looking back 11 years, are you glad you took that jump?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, I guess, you know, everything in life is opportunity cost. You know, you sometimes wonder what life might have been if you hadn't taken certain decisions. But, you know, in the book of life, the last 11 years or so has been fairly interesting. You know, I've met a lot of people around the world, had a lot of great experiences. I have a deeper understanding of a lot of places, cultures.
Yeah. I want to get into your Australia story at some point.
Sure. Yeah. It comes up. Yeah.
But we don't have to necessarily go chronologically. Did you get any pushback from family or friends on taking this path?
Yes. Yeah. Depending on the side of the family. So my mom is more the one who's been always like, you know, whatever you want to do, fly free, you know, I'll support you. My dad's also been supportive, but he was definitely the one to pressure, you know, the option of staying in Canada and having a life that was more based in Canada. And I realized like my aunt, who's a lovely person, she was, when I came back from Australia and Southeast Asia, which was a year and a half, which was like 2008 to 2009. I remember I met with her and her first comment was, "You're so incredibly brave."
Yeah.
And I remember being a bit taken aback by that because for me, I just always had this dream of travel and wanting to do these things. And I never, I guess for her, or maybe how that side of the family was brought up, it was a bit more fear-based, being far from home and like this and that. Whereas for me, it was always like something I wanted to do. And I felt honored that I actually got to fulfill it.
It's nice when you can somewhat inspire people that way. It's something I never expected either. So sometimes it's like, did I take the right course here? Am I just screwing around all over the world? And then, you know, some kind of comment like that from a friend or family member. And it's like, oh, wow. Like, yeah, that is pretty cool what I did. I am pretty lucky.
Well, when I go back, I definitely, you know, I have friends who are settled down in different parts of Canada and the States mostly that, you know, I've known for most of my life. And, you know, I sometimes wonder, okay, if I had stayed in the same job, got a house, settled down, you know, what would my life be like? But whenever I'm kind of thinking like, oh, maybe I should have done this or that, then I realize that like maybe those friends are envious of my freedom and the fact that I've gotten to do a lot of stuff. And I'd have to say the role of social media is interesting because graduating university, and starting my life as an expat kind of coincided with the rise of Facebook.
Uh-huh.
Like in Korea, I met a girl who told me, you know, she was about 10, 15 years older. She said, oh, when we traveled in Southeast Asia, we would just leave like a note on a bulletin board and hopefully our friends would like follow us to the next city or country and know where we were going. And, you know, I was kind of thinking, you know, how interesting that was, but also like, wow, that's a really inefficient way to communicate, you know?
I know.
It's, you know, you just put a note out there in the ether and pray that it hits its intended target.
That's crazy. There's this whole story and just remind me of this thing been to South America?
No, I've, yes, only one country, Isla Margarita in Venezuela.
Okay.
But I haven't been anywhere else, unfortunately.
Okay. There's this story about this jail in Bolivia where apparently you can take tours of the jail. Mm-hmm. And there's a book about it. The book is called Marching Powder. And this jail, the guy would run tours, but it was all through a note system. So you had to, he would give the note to somebody and then they would pass it to another traveler, you know, as they were like crossing paths. It's like on the bus, here, like go see this guy and do a tour. And he was like really successful.
Yeah, I guess word of mouth and notes, you know.
I kind of long for those days. Sometimes it's like social media and everybody can see everything and then these places blow up. Do you feel like strange about that when you travel and you see all this stuff blasted on social media?
for me, it was always the positives outweighed the negatives. And for the most part, I still think so. Like, I think it would be interesting to kind of visit the past and travel that way. But ultimately, we have so many more advantages in terms of getting around. Like, just for example, you know, you go to a new country, you get a SIM chip, and just having like Google Maps and TripAdvisor in terms of finding some pretty incredible places, especially if you're traveling solo. Like, the old way was you go to a travel agent and it's like you kind of really have to do a lot of homework and, you know, planning, whereas now you can just you know, on a whim, I'll buy a ticket maybe somewhere I don't know where I'm going for my vacation. I'll just download the wiki travel page in PDF. I'll just look at a few things in TripAdvisor, Google Maps, and for me, I don't have to overplan. I always like a bit of spontaneity. So those resources kind of allow me to be much more successful in my spontaneous travels compared to maybe doing that way back when.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it takes something away, but like, I'm very open to just seeing where things take me. So if I'm traveling alone, I'll usually stay at a hostel. I'll meet new people. You know, sometimes I'll meet some people that have lived there for a while or are from the area. And they'll say, oh, we're going here, we're going there. And I'll just say, yeah, I'll just see where it takes me.
Nice.
So I think that attitude and that kind of, that can lead to something interesting was the same back then that it is now. But I know I definitely have some friends who, you know, they'll ask me, they're like, oh, I'm going on a trip. You've been there, like, you know, how did you plan? And I'm like, I just went on the internet and I bought a ticket and then I sort of figured it out. And, you know, they're horrified. They're like, you didn't know what you were going to do? I'm like, nah, not really. I just figured it out as I went. And so for some people, whether it be living as an expat or just the way they travel, they're not built for maybe that type of stress. For them, it's an insurmountable problem almost. Whereas to other people, and I guess in terms of travel and living as an expat, you kind of get used to rolling with the punches a little bit, and figuring yourself out.
Did you have any stories that kind of got you to that point where you had to?
I mean, I've had situations like near-death experiences and that kind of stuff, like drowning once in Australia, once in Thailand. Just
wait, you know, drowning twice? Almost.
Yes. So in Australia, it was in choppy water and I can swim all right, but the other people that couldn't swim took like a noodle and we didn't have life jackets. And the boat, there was like a mothership sailboat and like a smaller boat. So the boat was away and it was quite deep water and I swallowed a lot of water and I basically was choking on the water in my lungs. And I knew that if I grabbed onto someone, I would take us both down. So I had to kind of... I had to just tread water and cough my lungs out, and it was okay. And the other time in Thailand was the riptide off Pukhet. And it was kind of stupid, I guess. I was just playing frisbee on the beach with my friend, and suddenly we realized we were being taken out to sea. And every time I kind of did what was right. Apparently, you're supposed to swim towards shore diagonally and only with the wave as it's coming back to the beach. And I didn't do the diagonal thing, but like I wasn't fighting the, you know, what do you call it? You know, in Australia, they call it a riptide, the undertow. There's a couple names for it. Yeah, in North America, we'd say undertow.
Yeah.
So yeah, you let it take you far out to ocean, and then as soon as the tide pushes back, you swim like hell, and you just have to repeat until your feet find purchase on the sand. And both of us looked at each other. We both, you know, survived obviously, and we're like, we almost died over a friggin' frisbee. So
is the riptide bad in Phuket?
I literally had a moment as I realized I was in danger. That a year ago I'd been in Phuket and somebody had told me that a lot of tourists end up dying because they don't realize how. It was one of those things like that thought would have been useful about a minute earlier. But
well, I'm glad you can sit here and talk about these stories, man. That's pretty scary.
Yeah, well, I think I'm quite calm in those situations because I had surgery when I was born, and I've had those kind of situations a lot when I was young, where I couldn't breathe and I had to like just stay calm. And just
was it because of water?
Just it was. It's called a T fistula, tracheoesophageal fistula. So basically, there was a hole between, you know, my windpipe and my food pipe, and the surgery affected the ability of my esophagus to push food down. So I always need some liquid to help. If it's mushy food, I can eat without liquid, but I always have some next to me. But if it's something dry like bread, it would kind of get stuck there. So
even now, still?
It was really bad when I was a kid. It got better when I was 13. But yeah, even now, I always just make sure I have liquid when I'm eating. And there's usually never any problems. Like as an adult, it hasn't really stopped me from doing anything apart from, if somebody offers me a piece of bread or something dry and there's no liquid around, I'll just say, okay, maybe later.
No saltine challenges?
No.
Those experiences did not deter you from more travel, huh?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Nice. So you just said, let's keep going.
Yeah. There's definitely, I'm trying to think some other, mildly scary moments, but obviously when you come to, I think after you have one of those experiences, you just kind of like take stock of things. Like when it's happening, you have an adrenaline rush and your instinct is to panic, and you just kind of have to override that and try to think about what the most logical way to keep yourself alive is, and just to do it and not think about anything else. And then afterwards, you have time to freak out if you survive.
I'm so scared of drowning. That's the worst. So tell me about the year in Australia, because that was a non-teaching job, correct?
So many developed countries have a deal with Australia. They can do a 1-year working holiday. So I went to Australia. I started off in Brisbane. Got a job, luckily, right away as a teacher. Somebody had, they were going to bring me on part-time, and somebody had a mental breakdown, and suddenly I had an offer for a full-time job. And that was really a really positive experience. I was treated quite well, and I think at least as a Canadian and English person, it's a very popular place because there's a lot of similarities, but it's quite different, and of course the weather's better.
Yeah.
So it was after 3 months. Like I probably could have stayed in that job for a long time, and if I wanted to make like Australia my home, I could have just kept getting certification and continued there. But I had a year, and my intention was, the holiday part of the working. So I had saved up some money after a couple months, and I went to Airlie Beach, and it was really interesting because a lot of times they say, oh, they won't hire expats for those, not expats, but like backpackers, right? And I'd met a Canadian guy, and it was funny because he was yelling at me. He was saying that, he said, where are you from? I said, oh, I'm from Canada. He said, oh, no, you're not. You're a bloody Yank. And he was Canadian, but that's kind of, a lot of Australians might say that to Canadians, they don't see the difference between Canadians and Americans. And, if you want to be combative, you can just say, there's no difference between Kiwis and Australians. But I remember thinking, I'm like, how can I prove to this guy that I'm not American since he doesn't believe me? So I just started screaming and cursing at him in my best Quebec French. And the guy laughed, invited me up to his place for a beer. And then I realized that he worked for the boats, and he had gotten a job as a backpacker. And he was a cool guy. He gave me a few tips. He's like, it probably won't work because they don't really hire that many, but here's what you should do. So I kind of followed his advice. And then maybe 2 weeks later, he saw me in the uniform on the boat, and I could tell he was a bit surprised. I'm like, oh, thanks, man. It was good advice.
So that job on the boat was doing what? It
was a little bit of sailing, but basically you're washing dishes, helping to clean stuff. And at first I was a volunteer. That was kind of like the entryway. So it was like doing dishes and helping sail a little bit. And then I had a good reputation. I got to know the people, and they gave me a job as a bartender on one of the bigger boats. So that's when I joined the team. And the job, the first job teaching was like okay salary, but Brisbane was a bit expensive. And it was like a professional job I'd put on my CV that was cool. The second job it paid really not that much, but you're in paradise reliving everyone's favorite part of Australia over and over again. And then the last job was, the middle of nowhere, but it paid really well.
Where was that one?
That was in Norseman in Western Australia. It's 2 hours south of Kalgoorlie, which is the big mining area, and 2 hours north of Esperance, which is a coastal resort type place.
So did the boat job take you to all those places, or that was a separate?
It was separate. So you have a whole year, and I guess I thought I would see all of Australia, but it was kind of 3 to 4 month periods. So my work life, I guess I ended up working a bit more than 6 months in those 3 places, but I took time out at each interval world just to be a backpacker and go between cities and do some stuff. And I remember I was complaining. I'm like, oh, I didn't do Northern Territory and Tasmania. And an Australian girl tapped me on the shoulder on the bus. She's like, mate, you've been in more places than I have in Australia, and I'm Australian.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I don't know why. You know, you have a whole year. You think like, oh, I'll get to do everything, you know?
Yeah. It's a big country, right?
Yeah, it's definitely big.
So it sounds like you really liked Australia.
I did, yeah.
It's a good would you go back there?
I would most definitely go back there. I just wish it wasn't so far from Canada. It's basically, you know, the exact opposite part of the world. But I really liked it there. To anyone considering going, people always ask me, and I say, look, the one thing that you have to be mindful of that you won't really hear, maybe you'll find it online, is that the sun is much more powerful than you think. You know, I've got a bit of melanin. Like, I usually don't burn too quickly, but I remember I went out for a walk without suntan lotion, maybe just for a half hour, and I came back with severe sunburn.
Why is that?
Because of, I believe, the ozone layer around that part of the globe, Australia, New Zealand. It won't feel hotter, but the sun will irradiate you much quicker. Like, I met several people that had skin cancers removed that were quite young, you know, in their 20s and even teens.
What?
Like, it's part of your annual checkup. In Australia is like they'll kind of check you out for skin cancers. Famously, like Hugh Jackman, I think, has survived like around four skin cancers being removed.
What?
So, yeah, that's I mean, people know about so many famous things, and that's the thing I always kind of tell them.
What about I think I asked you this before. What about the dangerous insects? There's so many things that can kill you in Australia, I've read. Is that true or false?
The safety briefing I had on the boat, I remember, it was a Finnish girl who was working, and she had the best explanation. You know, like, okay, if you're going scuba diving or snorkeling or walking around, she just said, if you see something that is unfamiliar, it's probably trying to kill you. She's like, oh, you're in Australia, so remember, it's probably trying to kill you. So I thought that was very interesting. She didn't have slides. She didn't have like, this is really dangerous because of that. She's like, if you don't know what it is, don't mess with it, because remember, Australia, the lethality is. But, you know, for the most part, in the cities and stuff, you're not really a danger from like a lot of wild animals coming at you.
Tell me about the place in the west. You said the
Norseman. It's a mining town of maybe like 200 people on paper, but there's I worked at a BP, so British Petroleum kind of roadhouse gas station, and they had a lot of what they call road trains, which are the big trucks, but they maybe have like 4 cabs behind them, and you have to imagine it's like a T intersection in Western Australia, and that's the beginning where a lot of the goods go to the eastern states, which are more populous and wealthy. So it's a big refueling point. So even though the town isn't very big, they just need people to work out there. And I was kind of lucky because I was the only one who ended up working both in the kitchen and the cache and learning the computer system quite well. So it was... you work 6 days a week. It was also casual work, which is interesting because in Australia, there's like full-time, part-time, and casual. So they don't give you all the benefits in casual, but they give you a slightly higher hourly rate. But it's like, I was like living on site. So yes, very casual.
Nice.
Living on site and working 6 days a week. But it basically, I saved about 10 grand in less than 3 months, and that paid for the next 6 months, which was my first time in Southeast Asia.
Wow.
So, and I also I didn't get to do much like New South Wales and Victoria, where like Sydney and Melbourne are. So that was kind of how I ended out my year in Australia, by exploring, Sydney, a few parts of New South Wales and Victoria. That same shift off with you.
Got it.
So,
and then Southeast Asia.
Southeast Asia was...
Did you go there to travel after that?
Yeah, to travel, because when I lived in Korea, I didn't end up staying a full year the first time. I came back. I basically thought I was going to, I did an experience. I'm going to make my life in Canada. That didn't work. So then I ended up saying, okay, let's go back and travel abroad. And I ended up choosing Australia. So Southeast Asia was like unfinished business. Australia has some good cheap airlines. So I took like a Jetstar flight, I remember, from Melbourne to Bali. So where am I going to start Southeast Asia? And obviously I was like, okay, Bali seems like the first place to start.
Yeah, you got to go to Bali, man.
Yeah.
So do you do a backpacking trip after Australia for a significant amount of time?
Southeast Asia, yeah, I did
Yeah.
6 months.
6 months.
So I did I did Bali for a bit. What else did I do? I did Laos. I did Vietnam. I did Thailand for the first time. I briefly did Malaysia. Only KL. And I wish I had done more. Because it was one of those things where, like, I'll spend a few days in Kuala Lumpur. And then I realized, I really like Malaysia. I kind of wish I had already booked my return ticket. So I was like, I should have stayed a bit longer.
Everybody does that.
And I know you and Jabari, and
Yeah.
I have other friends here who have spoken well of Malaysia and stuff. So
Yeah, everybody does that. It's funny because it's a nice central point in Southeast Asia, and they're always everybody we met. It's like, oh yeah, we're leaving tomorrow. Leaving tomorrow. You got to hang out, you know.
And it's interesting what you and Jabari were saying, because I know, like, when I was there too, I had a cab driver tell me, you know, like, the population, like the Malays control, like, the politics, and then there's the Indians and the Chinese. I think the Chinese are big on the economic side, and the Indians in terms of, I forget exactly the breakdown, but he gave me, like, a brief history of Malaysia in a short cab ride. And it was at that time I didn't know a whole lot. You know, they had just built the Petronas Towers, and I knew Kuala Lumpur was the capital, but I didn't know a whole lot else. So it was a very, I still remember that cabbie.
What's that like, just being a backpacker in 6 months? Like, what do you go through, and how does that make you feel, and how does your rhythm change, or anything that you want to share about that?
I thought it was great for them. Like, they're obviously, you know, you miss your friends and family to a certain extent. At that time, I spent 1.5 years away from home. So, you know, I miss my friends and family, but of course there's like Skype and Facebook. You can kind of keep them up to date with what you're doing. But the thrill of doing it, especially to new countries I'd never been, to countries that people had told me about for years, like the excitement, the adventure part far outweighed the negatives that, you know, occasionally you're sleeping in somewhere that's a bit uncomfortable, or that, you know, things don't work out exactly the way you'd like to. But I was always passionate about doing it. A lot of the places I went to far exceeded the expectations I had, and I ended up having, you know, a lot of cool experiences. So when I came back at the end of that, I remember thinking, like, that was the best 1.5 years of my life. You know, working, but not that much compared to the amount of traveling in that 1.5 years. You know, I think because of the 6 months in Southeast Asia, where, like, you know, I could have worked, but the salary wouldn't have been that good. And that was the whole idea of, like, you know, working at that roadhouse in the middle of nowhere in Australia, was to basically save that Southeast Asia money.
So you said the best 1.5 years of your life to that point.
Yeah.
What did you get from it?
Well, one of the biggest things was that just that I'm my personality type. I can make myself feel at home in many different places with many different people, and I learned a lot that I could do this lifestyle for a lot longer. After 1.5 years, that is when I came to the realization that, like, I could do this. I could live as an expat. And I'll have to admit, there's another factor, which is winter. And at that point, with Australia and Southeast Asia, I had missed 2 Montreal winters. And I remember thinking, everyone always talks about, oh, when I retire, I'm going to go to Florida, I'm going to go here, because I don't like winter. Like, a lot of older people that I was around in Canada always said that. And I remember thinking to myself, like, why do I have to wait till I'm old?
I know exactly what you mean. I always say that, why wait? Why wait? You can see those places now.
Exactly. So
why do you think people don't do that in our culture? Like, what is that about? Why don't they?
I think it can be family expectations, and also, like, certain personality types. Like I said, like, their fear of traveling and being unfamiliar surroundings with unfamiliar people, that fear kind of outweighs the interesting or excitement they have doing it. So, like, I've always said, you really get to know someone when you travel with them. Like, I've had friends who, you know, I was good friends with, but I'd never traveled, and then I traveled with them, and I realized, wow, they really don't travel well. Like, everything they thought they were gonna die, like, oh, don't do this, it's dangerous, or you could get sick, and look, I got this rash, and blah blah blah. And I'm not saying there isn't dangers occasionally traveling, but if you have that mindset where you're a bit, you're always worried, then it might be that, you know, traveling away from your comfort zone for that long period of time is not for you, possibly. But for me, that's what I learned from the 1.5 years in Australia, was like, yeah, definitely I can do this. I want to go to more places. And
Yeah, dude, you almost drowned twice. You're like, I'm good. I'm not. I'm meant to travel, man.
Yeah, well, that's actually less than the amount of times I almost choked to death when I was younger. So,
Jeez. Wow.
but hey, I'm still here. Like the doctors didn't think I might live to a super old age, and I had double pneumonia when I was 10 years old.
Damn.
And I remember at the time, no one said, "Oh yeah, you're close to dying," but I was in the hospital for like 2-3 weeks. And I remember years later, my mom's like, "Oh, remember when you were in the hospital when you were 10 and almost died?" And I was like, "Hey, I thought I was just really sick. You never said this almost died stuff at the time."
Yeah, it's like when you find out that there's no Easter Bunny or Santa Claus. although much more tragic. Sorry.
Yeah, not exactly, but actually, I remember I got all three at the same time. You know, it was like Easter Bunny, Tooth Fairy, Santa Claus. It was all in one conversation. You know,
Yeah.
once the crack was there, I asked about everything. I remember it dawned on me like, oh my god, it's all a lie.
And yeah, you almost did die in the hospital. We just didn't tell you. It's like, what?
Yeah. I guess I kind of knew, but I was positive. Like I don't know. I was taught like meditation a little bit growing up. I remember having this biofeedback thing on my fingers and having like, you know, calming your brain, and like in sequence you kind of feel different parts of your body numbing. So my dad and my mom had some interesting things like that they taught me, and in hindsight, I guess you know, they've definitely had some benefit.
Do you meditate now?
I guess I do it when I'm in. So I don't know. Do you know Wim Hof, the Iceman?
No.
So he was on Rogan. He's kind of popular. So
Okay.
he does a combination of breathing exercises and cold exposure. So for me, it's like, okay, when I'm doing yoga, which I should be doing more than I am, or let's say in Korea, did you ever go to the JimJilBang, the saunas?
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I totally miss the JimJilBangs, especially after, you know, you play sports or something.
Oh,
Like the recovery time, it feels so good.
there's nothing better than a JimJilBang.
So I guess for me, meditation is when I'm under like stress, but I have to stay relatively still, like holding a yoga pose or JimJilBang or cold water exposure. And that was the biggest thing. Most of my friends wouldn't do the cold tank at the JimJilBang. Oh yeah, for those of you that don't know, JimJilBang is like the Korean word for a sauna. And what is it? An onsen in Japan. They're similar. So like men and women have their own kind of, it's like a public bathhouse, separated men and women, and there's a common area.
Yeah, but they are like supercharged saunas where there's different pools, different rooms. There's restaurants, and sometimes bars,
libraries, video games. Yeah, you can get. Of course, you can get your soju and your, you know, get your mekju, your somek, mix it up.
It's a great day in the JimJilBang.
Yeah, and yeah, so they have like warm, hot, and they have cold, and nobody else would do cold. But somebody had told me, I forget, I think sauna is a loan word from Finnish. And I think it was a Finnish girl who told me, like, you need to do do it as a lap. Like, and it's true, the more you do a lap, going from the extremes of hot to cold, the easier it becomes. But definitely, you know, in terms of meditating, like when you're first getting in the super hot and, you know, your body's telling you like you're being cooked alive, get out. Or the first time you go in the cold one and you have a similar reaction, it's kind of like, you know, your mind has to override your body, you know, its senses. And so that's in terms of like the meditating I kind of learned when I was young, in terms of just keeping yourself calm and forcing yourself to like just go through it for however many seconds you've decided.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I go back and forth on meditation, but I do think it's one of the best things that I've ever done. And there's many types of it, and there's many ways to do it, but it's basically, just being present. Mm-hmm. So that could be, you know, I'm hot and what's happening to my body and where, or I'm cold. And
just one note on JimJilBangs. When I traveled to Korea, I would often bring a super thick yoga mat, you know, it wrapped up with these Velcro straps. And that's what I would do. Like when I would go to like Busan or go for another city, instead of getting a hotel, I would basically, or a hostel. Hostels weren't as big. They're getting bigger now in some areas. I would just go to a JimJilBang. So it's like the equivalent of like, I don't know, $7-12, but you can sleep there overnight as well.
Right.
But Koreans are often used to like sleeping on hard mattresses or hard floors. Like I remember seeing like, 70, 80-year-old people in the JimJilBangs sleeping on a hard floor. But if I were to do that, like I would have a lot of back pain and I wouldn't be too spry the next day.
Yeah.
So that yoga mat was kind of like a travel lifesaver. Had my backpack, attached the Velcro, yoga mat to the back, and there we go.
I slept in a JimJilBang once, and it was the only time. There was so much farting and sleeping with a bunch of old men, and I was just like, "Yeah, I think I'm just gonna get the hostel." But you're right, and at that time there wasn't many options.
Love Motel.
Or love motels. That's another story too. It's funny because a lot of us have the same sort of travel path. A lot of the ESL, people that we meet and everything.
Yeah.
It's like. Korea is generally, the first kind of experience because it was easiest. Unless you go back about 10 years and it was Japan, right? It was like Japan was the one. Then it was Korea.
Yeah. It was like your gateway.
Right. Right. Your gateway drug.
Try it a little bit. Yeah.
And then everybody loved it. So now, I don't know how many people I meet now after 10 years of doing this who speak some Korean.
I met a girl here and I knocked on her door by accident. And we didn't figure it out right away, but we're like, I know you from Korea. We know the same people. We've hung out before.
No way.
So it's like, there is this similar progression of from country to country sometimes.
Yeah, it's this badge. You have the first level. You got Korea. Okay, what's next? So what do you think?
Missed my Malaysian travel badge though. I opted for Europe during that period.
Oh, so what? Okay, so you went to Europe after?
Yeah. So I worked. So after my year and a half abroad, that was like I came home. It was 2009. Everyone was depressed because the economy was not good after the global collapse, and I was living at home. And that's really the crucible of like, okay, at that point I'd been abroad for maybe 2+ years, and I still thought maybe I'll have my life in Canada and settle down, but there was a lot of negativity. And I was broke. So after a year and a half of traveling, I was broke. I came back and it was just, there was a lot of stressful negativity. And I just called my best friend there, who ended up marrying a Korean woman and staying there for over 10 years, but not at that point. And I just called him up. I said, get me a job in Korea. I want to go back. So I ended up staying from 2009 until about 2012, 2013.
I want to ask you something about that time back in Canada, because
Sure.
I had a similar experience where I tried to repatriate, and
it was tough.
It was very hard for me, man. The struggle was real, and what was it for you that made it hard? You said there was stress, but what do you think it was?
I think living at home, being broke, like I didn't have a car. I kind of grew up in the suburbs. Again, it was kind of winter. So like the amount of jobs, unless I was borrowing money and moving out and getting a job, like I basically had to get a very low level job that was close to my house because I didn't have access to a car. And I ended up working at Walmart with, at a photo lab because it was in walking distance. And I really enjoyed that job because I learned a fair amount. We still did film at the time, but obviously digital was getting bigger. But I was just like, what am I doing here? Like,
right.
This compared to the life I was having in Korea and Australia. So I just called my friend and I'm like, yeah, I want to go back to Korea, get me. And he just hooked me up with a job fairly quickly and off I went.
Yeah. How did you feel about that? Was it any kind of like conflict within you about it being your home, but yet not fitting in, or anything there that?
Yeah, well, in terms of fitting in, it's kind of interesting because so in terms of like fitting in, I felt sometimes in some parts of Quebec, because my French wasn't Quebec French enough, a little bit like out of place.
Yeah.
And it was very strange because as I traveled and had these experiences, that perception completely reversed. Because I've had the French connection with people from all over the world, and je suis débrouillant. I was resourceful in terms of speaking French, and it was a pleasure to speak French. But when I go back to where I was born, I mean that's changed now. But like this was kind of a hang up from maybe my teenage years.
Yeah,
I was uncomfortable. I was shy about speaking French in the area where I grew up. But everywhere else, I felt like it was an asset and like a cool thing.
So I'm going to hit you with a couple of quick ones, right?
Go for it.
What's your least favorite question that people ask you when you travel as a backpacker? The least favorite question you get?
I guess it has to do with like, like, why didn't you set up, why do you travel so much? Why don't you stay home? Like, you're whatever age, why aren't you married? Why don't you have a family? I guess questions along those lines. They don't really come up too much, but more recently, when I was a younger expat, it was like, is your family around? And they meant like, like mother or father. But now it's like, are you with your family? And they mean like your wife and kids. So it's like, the conversation is like, I don't have kids, I'm not married. And they're just, depending on the culture, they can be very much like, but you're this age, you should be married, you should have kids. So just having to explain that is kind of...
Yeah, that one's... How old are you now?
I'm 37.
Yeah, okay. 42. It keeps on coming. it gets stranger and stranger, the looks you get the older you get. Like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, and maybe it'll happen for me. I don't know. I want to remain optimistic.
Yeah, for sure.
The possibility that it might not is there as well. So we'll see. So
if you had to go to one place back in Southeast Asia and just kind of plant your flag there for a while, but you just have to choose one, what would it be?
Interesting. I guess it might be the south of Thailand. I can't think of like one specific spot. I always like to rent a scooter. I kind of had a routine, wake up, go get a 1 hour massage, then go for breakfast, then get on my scooter, drive and explore, come back and have like kind of a night out. So probably some of those areas, either island hopping or whatever. I have a friend in Chiang Mai, a good friend. I like Chiang Mai a lot, and Bangkok as well. I have friends there. But yeah, maybe because of familiarity, but like I find that Thailand has this great mix of like developed and developing country where things, they're not the cheapest in the world, but they're still quite affordable. But you can also like, for example, like I've never really needed serious medical attention, but I have friends that did, and they went to Thailand. I even have an American friend who had his cancer treated. Like he was, I guess, living abroad. I guess his insurance situation with the States was not in a good place. This is like pre-Obamacare era. So he ended up going to Thailand, and there are worse places to recover from chemo than a beach in Thailand, I guess. Yeah. And like it would have been unaffordable, I think, the treatment in the States without insurance. So
wow, in Bangkok? I guess, right?
Was it in Bangkok? Yeah, I believe it was.
Definitely.
Yeah. I think he ended up recovering outside of Bangkok, but yeah, he got the treatment, I believe, in Bangkok.
So how do you find balance being abroad between, missing home and living this life? Or how do you, I guess what I'm asking is, how do you stay connected to family and friends? I mean, I know you talked about social media and stuff, but I mean, do you take certain trips back or?
Yeah, I try to like the Southeast Asia thing where I came back 2009 was probably the longest. That and Europe, which were both a year and a half, but for the most part, every year I try to make it back to Canada. Sometimes it can be for a couple months, and sometimes it can be like a shorter period of time. Like with our vacation situation now, it'll probably be 4 weeks. Because I want to go back to Korea, visit some people, visit some family in Western Canada. So maybe the rest will be like 4 weeks in Montreal. And it's annually. There's some really close friends and obviously family that every time I go back every year I will see and I'll catch up in person. And there's other people that I'll try to see, as teachers, right? So we have more vacation than the average person. So I'll try never to say this to somebody who's not teaching, but in terms of like, a lot of my heart and my life is in North America, and, people have jobs and families and stuff. So often they can't see you during the week, even though you're not there that often. So even the summer vacation we have, which is about 6 weeks, it doesn't feel like it's enough to properly do the rounds because, people have moved away from Montreal. Some of my friends live in Chicago or New York or Toronto or whatever, and it's not always easiest to just kind of jet around and see everyone. They want to see you, but they have a limited schedule, and you try to fit everyone in, and you just have to accept that like you won't necessarily get to see everyone.
It's hard. I tried once doing like, okay guys, I'm at this bar or at this park, on this day, and whoever wants to come.
Yeah.
They're like, no, dude, I've got a life. Maybe I can come for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm like, it doesn't work. So I always wind up doing the rounds. But
For me, it happens with my birthday because people are always gone. Well, you're July, right?
Yeah.
So like I'm in the middle of the summer. So, everyone, our friends here that celebrates a birthday here, like my birthday's never celebrated because it's in the middle of the summer break. And when I go home, I don't like to plan my own party, but I'll do the same thing. I'm like, I'm going to this place. If you guys want to come, you can come. And a couple of my close friends, I'll like DM and be like, hey, hopefully you can come out. But it's never like a big party that I like to plan for myself.
Do you feel bad about it?
A little bit. Like my grandmother's a bit unwell now, and she's my last grandparent, so I kind of wish I could be with her a lot more. We're pretty close, and there's definitely people that I wish I had in my life on a daily basis. Sometimes can be a bit tough, but that's the thing about social media is that like even though it's far away and it's not the same as being there in person, there's still you can have you can still have somewhat of a connection. It's not like writing letters and it takes months for it to, like, often I'll give you an example. My friend, he was a very close friend in high school. I hadn't seen him for a while, for about like 3-4 years. I went to see him, and the last time I saw his son, he was like 1 or 2. Now he's like obviously much older, and he's had a daughter. So they're a really great family, and I told them I would try to send them videos. So we end up sending videos back and forth where I'm like, oh, here's my life here, this is what I'm doing, send a couple pictures, edit it in my phone, shoot it off, and then he'll do the same with his kids, and like, oh, hey, Uncle Patrick, blah blah blah, this is what we're up to. Yeah. And that's it's precious. It's like something that wasn't really available like 15 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, one of the main driving reasons for doing this podcast was to share this kind of stuff with friends at home, in a way, offer experiences that are not my own and people like you. And I mean, every time for mine, it's those 3 little nieces over there. Like,
wow, super cute.
Yeah, I cry every time I say goodbye to them, and they don't know what's going on. They're like, Uncle Derek's gonna cry again. I'm just like, you guys, I'll see you soon. But to them, it's like, oh, he'll just come when he comes back. They don't know the whole cycle. But those things I find really, really hard. And at this point, have you made some kind of plan to get yourself back there, or do you think this is like your lifestyle for?
Well, I like the idea of being a digital nomad. I think I'd like to set myself up, develop myself more to be able to work remotely wherever I am. Obviously, our generation, we have less, let's say, loyalty to one company, or we have a whole career at one company. But then as expats, we work on contracts often. So it's even more removed and likely that we'll end up staying in one company, let alone one country. So instead of the dream being like, studying a certain thing, climbing the corporate ladder, and then, retiring with a lot of money, but then you've had a lifetime of stress, I kind of want to, I have some people that I looked up to through programming, through some business opportunities, through even managing social media and doing certain things where they've been able to make a decent income for themselves, even teaching through Skype or something.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of different options. So, at this point, I've always been pretty good at saving. I remember hearing you and Jabari talk about saving, and I was like, I had my budget in Korea, and like, in the beginning, I was able to save basically $1 million a month. And I know that sounds a lot, but it's only $1,000. So
just don't say one. I saved $1 million a month.
Yeah, I saved $1 million a month.
No, but that was pretty much half, right?
Well, it became harder to do it when you guys came, but
right? Because it changed.
Yeah, like the food prices, like all the prices went up, and the salaries stayed the same. Yeah, they were stagnated.
I remember that. Yeah, I don't want to. That's
a side thing. Sorry.
No, that's a really, really good point. What were we talking about before that?
I think about family,
the digital nomad.
Nieces, and in terms of people.
No, because I want to ask you about the digital nomad stuff, because that's fascinating. Because one of the questions I had for you, and then I was going to ask you, do you think this is a sustainable lifestyle? And digital nomad is one way to do that, right?
Right.
But do you think that this style of digital nomad, because it changes so fast, like, do you think that this is going to change and be something else in like 2 years? Because right now it's okay, Instagram and the stories and this, but what will it be?
I'm glad you asked that. I think there still is a lot of opportunity for it, but I think with automation, AI, the job prospects, if it isn't handled well, I don't know if they'll ever roll out a UBI, Universal Basic Income. I've seen some interesting stuff with Andrew Yang recently. He was running on that. So I don't know, but currently we have a good salary where we are, and I'm trying to save a lot more because even though I saved back in Korea, I ended up spending it on traveling. The cycle of my life was like save and then spend on travel and get to zero, and I did that fully twice. And so now that I'm out here, I'm like, okay, I'm in my 30s, time to be a quote unquote adult about it, and save a bit more and stuff like that, and invest and educate myself more about finances. And I remember thinking a year or two ago, I'm like 35, I'm like, I feel old because I'm planning for my retirement. Like, that's an old person thing, but it's totally logical. It's like, all right, you've been doing this for a certain amount of time, and do you always want to be a traveling teacher or whatever, or do you want to do other stuff? So for me, the dream would be more time in Canada. I'm still not a fan of winter, but I'd probably want to spend maybe 4 or 5 months later when I have the money in Canada, and then the other time either traveling around. So now the beautiful thing is I have friends all over the world, places to stay, can travel. And
cool.
So
is it a money goal or is it a age goal, you think?
Right now?
Yeah,
I think it's a little bit of both. Like by 40, I guess I want to have a certain amount that'll give me a passive income, and obviously I still want to work. It may take a bit more time before I could say, oh, I have enough of passive income where that like any work I do is just extra.
Right.
So yeah, but I mean, before I came here, I was broke. So now I've been, especially the first 2 years, I've been very good, but since I moved to RAC, I didn't really follow my budget as much because I knew I'd be spending a bit more with the move. But overall, I guess, having talked to a lot of people, I'd probably still save better than average.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good for you, man. This was awesome. You should do your own podcast show. You got a lot to share, or write a book, or do a blog. Do you blog at all?
I used to, but I haven't in a long time. I feel that I need to get back on that. I kind of wanted. I have a YouTube channel, and I want to upload to it more. Reactivating my blog might be part of that. So I'll keep you informed.
Are you active on the YouTube channel?
Not as much. I went to Georgia and Armenia, and I posted some short videos there, but they weren't as planned and structured as I would have liked. So that's more of like a travel channel. But I've had ideas for other channels as well. So yeah, we'll see. If I end up doing the podcast has been in my head for a long time as well. So,
well, one of the things that I was reading as researching this was that if you do a podcast, you reach tens of millions. Whereas if you do a YouTube of your podcast, you're going into billions. So the fact that you already have the YouTube vehicle,
right,
is perfect. Just set up that thing and put the mics in front of it.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's I'll definitely get some advice from you, and hopefully I'll have you on when I start my own podcast.
So what's the name of the YouTube channel?
Patrick Travels. So I think one was Patrick's Travel Blog and Patrick Travels, and they're kind of merged. Yeah, the blog, I don't even know if it's still active. I've got to double check, so I don't want to give the URL because maybe it was a WordPress blog, and I don't know if it's even still active because it's been a couple of years.
It just seems like everything's going to the vlogs now on YouTube, and it's much easier to access. I mean, do people even read anymore? I don't know.
Well, yeah, no, I think you were talking about another podcast, and I do watch a lot of YouTube because, the algorithm gets to know who you are and what you like. There's the autoplay feature.
Yeah.
So, like, if I'm cooking or something and I had decided what I wanted to watch, but then it'll just play something that it thinks I like, and, my hands, I'm cooking, so I don't bother changing it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like, I watch a lot more YouTube than I do like regular TV or other channels, just because it's very geared. Like, I like history, I like science, I like different types of stuff about news. So, all I have to do is re-click on YouTube, it'll refresh, and there'll be something from a creator that I'm interested in that's popped up. And yeah, it's negative. I don't read as much as I used to.
Yeah.
I do more audiobooks and podcasts, and I kind of walk around the village or whatever. But the amount of books that I read has diminished over time, which is unfortunate.
Do you listen to Russell Brand's podcast?
Yeah, the Truce. I've seen his YouTube thing.
The Truths?
The True News. It's his YouTube channel.
I think it's called Under the Skin.
Okay, so I don't think I've listened to his podcast, but I've watched his YouTube channel, which is like TREWS for like True News.
But his he just had a guy on, Daniel Ruskoff, I think.
Okay.
I'll put that in notes. But he was talking about the algorithms and everything, and how they feed you what you like, but how they actually need to keep you in that bracket of what you are. So if you're in a space, say like where you're looking at, stuff, maybe it's a bit negative.
Yeah.
And then you try to like get out of it and get into another space, the algorithm will essentially pull you back. So it's almost like a demon.
It's whatever you spent more time in.
Yeah. It's crazy.
And the big negative part of it, and do you know Tobuscus?
No.
Some guy named Toby, I forget his last name. He's a YouTuber, got fairly big, but he wrote recently, he had something called Dear Algorithm. And so this is the thing I don't like is I used to just scan my subscriptions and it would say who had a new video, and I would like just go and see the new video. But now like, you have to even click the bell, and even then you won't get the notification. So he was basically in a somewhat humorous way complaining about the algorithm, and it popped up in everyone's feed even if you weren't subscribed to him. So people were like, by making Dear Algorithm, you beat the algorithm and managed to get a lot of high profile. And I'd seen his YouTube stuff, but I wasn't even subscribed to him.
Wow.
That's the thing. There are some creators that I was subscribed to that like I don't even, they don't pop up anymore.
Yeah.
And I have to like manually go look for it.
Thank you for this chat, man. We could talk forever.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Yeah, I'll have you on my podcast.
I'm looking for Patrick Travels. What would your podcast name be?
What might
Maybe you don't want to put it out there. We have...
Yeah, well, I have a few names, but I haven't actually thought, and some of them might be terrible, so I don't want to...
Keep it secret, because there's we got about 400, 500 downloads as we speak right now.
Oh, okay.
Probably 200 of them are me, but
yeah, like the idea of the YouTube channel, Patrick Travels, and even my other channel, which I had back in 2005, was more to like catalog my travels than become like some YouTube star. The only time I posted something, somebody said, "Oh, you should post it to Reddit," was this video, DDR guy in Osaka, and I don't know if you know Dance Dance Revolution.
No.
But it's like there's sensors, and you have to match what's on the screen and dance.
Yeah.
And so this guy was so good. He's got his back to the screen, and he's getting like 100% for all his moves, including like flips and stuff. So I just filmed it, and I posted it, and I put it on Facebook, and my buddy's like, "I'll put it on Reddit." So, or share it, So I'm like, all right, maybe I will. And that's the most viewed video. I think it like was 7,000 views or so.
Oh, yeah?
So that's the only video that went like not viral, but it actually got like over 1,000 hits.
Wow, man. That whole thing is crazy. I don't even know. But yeah, man, let's talk more.
All right. Sounds good.
Anything last parting words or anything you want to share on the expat life?
Yeah, basically, if you've had this dream to be an expat or travel, I mean, just because you go away, it doesn't mean you have to commit to a long-term expat life. But I'd say there's a lot of people I talk to, when I go back home, when I'm thinking, oh, I don't have a family or a house or this, and they're like, "Oh, but you've had the freedom, you do all this stuff, like I wish I could have traveled and stuff." And I think there's a lot of people, obviously I understand if you have kids or whatever, there's a lot of people that always had this dream and they never even got a taste of it to see if it was for them. So I would say that if you have the opportunity to get that taste, to go abroad, to see if you're the type of person who could have a better life maybe abroad, then give it a shot, try to make it happen, and who knows, you might find you like the expat lifestyle.
Cool, man. Thanks again, buddy.
Thanks for having me on, Derek.
All right, cool.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to Enlightened Abroad. Have a great day wherever you are.